Good afternoon everybody, welcome to Pride House Birmingham and to our panel discussion around trans inclusion in grassroots sport. Thanks to everybody that's joining us today, it's really great to have you with us. We've got some amazing panellists with us today, so I'm really excited to talk to you all. I know you've got lots of really exciting things to say, so we're going to try and make sure that everybody gets a chance to get across some of these exceptionally important points in sport and physical activity right now. So, just to introduce myself first, my name's Michelle Daltrey, my pronouns are she, her. And I'm the chair of LGBT Sport Cymru in Wales, and I work as part of the UK LGBT Sport Alliance. So it's fantastic to meet you guys today, and I'm going to allow you to do your introductions. So over to you first.
Thank you very much. My name is Simon Croft, he, him, and I am Director of Professional and Educational Services at Gendered Intelligence. Gendered Intelligence is a charity that exists to increase understandings of gender diversity and improve the lives of trans people. So we work directly with the trans community, and we also provide a lot of education and training.
My name is Naomi Reid, pronouns are she, her, and I work for NBC Universal and help manage all of their DEI initiatives. And I'm also on the committee for Charlton Invicta and a player as well, or I try to be. And they are the first LGBTQ+ and ally team affiliated with a professional football club in Charlton Athletic.
Hi, I'm Thompson. I run a small community interest company called Trans Fitness, CIC, and an online directory at transfitness.co.uk, and I'm working towards helping trans and non-binary people to become physically fitter if they wish, mentally stronger and emotionally more peaceful as they become the people that they know that they truly are.
Thanks Vic, so over to you Claudia.
Hello, thanks for having me too. My name is Claudia Korbich. I work for the German Football Association. I'm diversity manager there, and I'm in charge of all areas of diversity and inclusion in that role. And I have also been involved in developing and implementing the new policy for trans and non-binary inclusion in amateur football. And I'm very happy to be here with you.
Thank you so much. So Vic, you've got the mic in your hand. This is what's going to happen today, brace yourself. You talked about the benefits of being physically active. And I guess my first question is really for all of you. You've got the mic, so you've got to start. In terms of the benefits for trans and non-binary individuals being involved in sport and physical activity, what are they? Why is it important? Why are we having these discussions?
We need to have these discussions because people are overlooking first of all the physical benefits, but also the mental health benefits, and particularly with the waiting times for gender identity clinics at present being at least 5 years long before your first appointment, then it's important that if people can get into a routine with some kind of sport and exercise, they can either work it alone if they choose and get the physical health benefits and the mental health benefits, or they can find a team or other people to train with and get the social aspects and enjoy being with other people who will help them push for their physical goals and feeling mentally better about going out, being active, having something to do whilst they wait, because it is a long wait. And if the waits are, as we know, and they carry on getting that little bit longer, then to be in a position where you can actually be physically strong enough to socially and medically transition, then that will help in your stead before you actually get to the clinic and potentially start hormones or have surgery, because your body will be ready to receive the hormones and recover from the surgery, hopefully in a much more efficient manner.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's not just about sport and physical activity?
No.
No, absolutely. Anybody else want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I can jump in. So I think one of the things that I've experienced is, like, when coming out, is quite an isolating experience. Often, if you're unlucky, you kind of lose a lot of people close to you, and at the time, I also thought I'd lost sport as well, because you just kind of write off that you can't do that anymore. And on a personal level, I got really depressed because I thought I couldn't play football anymore. And it ended up my friends and my housemates just kind of got fed up with me being miserable on a weekend, and they helped me find Charlton Invicta online, and just that kind of relief to be back in sport, back amongst the team, to experience that camaraderie, and just kind of as I was saying, that physical lift also gives you a mental lift. It's so important for your mental health. So yeah, I think that's why we need these discussions, because you can't just blanket ban trans people from sport.
No, thank you so much for sharing your own personal experience as well. That means a lot. Thank you. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, I don't have a huge amount to add, but I think sometimes we forget that trans people engage in sport for all the reasons that everybody else engages with sport. You know, we want that physical and mental health, we want the camaraderie, we want the fun. And, you know, that we should have access to that. But as Vix was saying, sometimes there are additional things for our community as well, particularly around preparation for or sometimes recovery from, you know, medical interventions and things like that. So there's an additional dimension. So it's even more important, I think, sometimes for that access to be in place.
Thank you, Simon. Did you want to come in there, Claudia?
Yeah, I wouldn't speak on behalf of trans and non-binary people. That's for you to do. I wouldn't do that. But I can speak for the grassroots football, and I think we all know about the power of football and what it can do to people, whether that's people who are fleeing a country or people who are coming out as trans or maybe also gay. And I think that's something that we have to provide. We have to provide a safe space for everyone, where they can come as they are and where they can play the sports that they like and feel safe and protected in case something happens. They also need to know who can help them, what are mechanisms to support them. I think that's where we come in, and I think that it's our main task to provide that space for people, for everyone.
I mean, that leads me really nicely on, actually, Claudia, in terms of the work that is happening at the moment, the work that you've been directly involved in. Can you explain to us a little bit more about how that's come about, what the response has been, and maybe just to explain a little bit more about it in detail for those people that aren't aware?
Yeah, basically we've been active in on trans and non-binary inclusion for about 3.5 years now. That's we started to receive a number of inquiries from parents, from coaches, and other people in the game who contacted us because players or their children who were playing football came out as transgender, and they wanted to change the team. They didn't know how to do that, or they didn't know whether they're allowed to do it. There were many issues, and there was a lot of confusion in general about gender identity. Some people mix it up with sexuality and all the letters in the LGBTIQ plus cause confusion for some people who are not really into it. And so there were many inquiries from also our regional associations. We've got 21 regional associations, and they are independent organizations, so also they have their own regulations, but they didn't know what to do with the inquiries that they had received also. So that was how it all started. And at the same time also a federal law was passed in Germany, which then allowed a third gender option for people to have it in their ID documents. And obviously that's also for us then a sign that we have to do something if we work in a binary sport, but we have 3 options by law, so we have to look into that. And that's how that triggered the whole process. First of all, we had to understand the issue. We had to educate ourselves and get experts, expertise from experts. And so we had some stakeholder consultations, and we facilitated exchanges between communities. So we invited people who are in the game and who came out. and also between our regional associations. So we listened to them, what their issues were, and so on and so forth. And then in the end, there were two main things that we identified that we will have to, or that we would have to resolve, and that was mainly concerning amateur football. That was what to do in the transition process. So when someone comes out, how do we deal with that transition period, which, as you all know, can be very long or very short, or doesn't really end, or it's very individual process. And then the other point is, how can we include non-binary people who don't identify as either male or female, because there is no non-binary football, and it might come in the distant future, but it's not there yet. And then there were also some other issues that came up in the process, like in the professional games, like at national team matches, for instance, the toilet situation or access control at the entrance. How do we deal with that? That we put that to the side first. We deal with that as well, but talking about amateur football, in the end, the presidents of the regional associations, they then tasked us to develop a universal policy, because in the meantime, some of the regional associations, 4 or 5, they had started to implement their own policies, or develop and implement their own policies, and then there was a risk of having 21 different policies and going in all directions and causing a lot of confusion. And of course, no one wanted to have that happen. So we then got tasked to do that, and we set up a working group. We spoke to the National Doping Association as well about the issue. They supported us they supported our view that it's about participation and inclusion, and that in amateur sports and grassroots sports should not be about any hormone levels or medication or something like that. That was a great relief and also a bit of a surprise, I must say, but that's right. It's good to hear that they are backing us up there. And then with that working group, we developed a proposal, I would say, and that said we would like people to self-identify and have them to decide where they would like to play, and we would also like to have a confidential person, a trusted person in each regional association who's a contact point for those people, who can help with paperwork and with issues that arise, because we are well aware that it won't go just smoothly as we are hoping it would be, but there will be issues. And so with that proposal, we went then through all relevant committees. So we went to the youth committee, the women's committee, amateur committee, I think 2 or 3 others, and they all approved it. And then we tabled it at the DFB board, and no one objected. And here we go. So we've got a new policy for next season where people can self-identify. And I must say, it was also, I find it very surprising that it was relatively easy to do it. I mean, it took us 2 years in the end to go through the whole process. But in the end, if you look at the result, I think we can be very happy about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're all going to back up and we're on our way over. I think it's the answer to everything for us here. I mean, it's great to hear the process was reasonably painless in the UK, and I think it's fair to say, globally and particularly on social media, it's a pretty toxic, and the word pretty is doing a lot of heavy lifting right here, environment for trans individuals, particularly sport being used as a political football, I think, to degrade the opportunities and the rights of trans people. I think the question I'd like to ask you all is, what is the impact that is having on the participation of trans and non-binary people in participation sport? What are we seeing? Do you want to kick us off, Sam?
Yeah, that would be great. I mean, because I look after our training and consultancy function at Gender Intelligence, I don't necessarily see that impact directly. But what I'm kind of picking up anecdotally, especially through the people who work with our youth services, is that people who are already playing are worrying about their future and whether they're going to get excluded. People who are not already playing, who might all have been thinking about, this might be something I like to do, are just stepping back, what's going to happen to me? I'm not going to be welcome. I don't want the stress. I think, as you say, it's part of that overall picture of the escalating erosion of rights that seems to be gathering pace. And I think that general impact on gendered intelligence's young people is very considerable. We see a lot of fear, we see a lot of disillusionment. And I think at Gendered Intelligence, what we see our job as is to not despair in the face of that. We will get there. Yes, times are tough, but I think we are aiming to find ways to enable young people to be engaged in those things. So when we do have some of our own spaces, like our summer camps are coming up, there'll be physical activities on those summer camps. As I mentioned in the introduction, there's trans-only swimming. And I think it's at times like this when community and allyship are particularly important. So I think for us it's about looking for our ways to try and make sure that there are still opportunities. And so as an organisation that provides community-facing services and ways for people to engage for the community itself, but also we're out there, the part that I look after is our training and consultancy, trying to go and change those minds, improve the conversations, bring the right questions to the table. If we don't ask the right questions, we don't get the right answers, and I think that's a particular issue at the moment. So trying to bring those two things together is sort of where we're at. But yeah, it is tough out there at the moment.
Yeah, that's underestimating it, right?
I was just listening to what Claudia was saying, and I just want to lift that and bring it over here, but I'm not really aware of the kind of whether Germany have the culture wars that we have here. So I working in the media, I'm very privy to the narratives that are being pushed out about trans people, and ultimately that just infiltrates people's perceptions and it puts a stigma on trans people. And whether that's overt, whether it's passive, whether it's in the form of unconscious bias, it absolutely puts trans people off getting involved in sport, because ultimately no one wants to go somewhere and be attacked or shouted at or told that they don't belong. Especially within sport, that's something that you do as an outlet, that's something that makes you happy, that keeps you fit. And to have that fear of, like, I'm currently in the process of joining a women and non-binary team, and I'm really nervous, and I'm old now, so you think, oh yeah, you get over that, but it's really not the case. The media stigma that is very much in line with government narrative as well really impacts how day-to-day people view trans people. And it seems as if they don't really have that in Germany. So can we borrow that, or I might just move over to you, Claudia.
I mean, before going to you, Victor, I wanted to ask you, Claudia, in terms of the response that you've had in Germany, what has it been like? What's the external response to it like?
I mean, if I may just quickly reply to Naomi's point about the culture. I mean, I've lived in the UK for almost 10 years. And I can compare it, and I totally agree there is a different culture around social media, and also the public debate around transgender people, and also the government. I mean, that's quite clear. Our government is very much supporting of transgender rights. I mean, we also have a trans woman in the parliament, and so that from on that side, that helps a lot, and also that law that I mentioned earlier. But of course, not everything is perfect here, and you have those trolls, and you have the far right, and we have a far right party as well. And if you listen to them, yeah, I mean, I don't have to talk about that here because we all know what they say. But then I think the culture in social media is, I think they are more dominant in the UK. Social media is being listened to much more, and also politicians take to social media much more for debate, which I think is not always helpful, because it reduces a debate to a tiny snippet, and there's not much room for discussion. So that's a problem. But coming back to your question about the perception of our work, I think generally it was applauded, but the media was overwhelmingly, I would say, neutral to positive when we published it. No one expected it also, because I think only a week before the swimming federation, FIBA, I think they're called, I don't know, they just came out with the opposite policy. I mean, you will all know it. But no one expected us to publish anything around that issue. And but in football, it caused also a great fuss. I mean, I've been contacted by several national associations who were interested in the policy and who want to find out what we're doing, and they're also working on it, but they haven't got their head around it yet. And so I'm talking to them on a just work basis and provide the information to them, and hope they will find the right solution that works for them. And also UEFA and FIFA contacted us because they also need to find a solution, and they haven't addressed the issue yet. Yeah, we will see where it goes. We will do our best to support and support and defend our policy, because I think that's the way to go, because that's what our job is. We are providing football for everyone. We always claim we are the football association for Germany, so we should also provide football for all people who live in Germany. That's as easy as that.
It should be as easy as that, yeah. Vix, you've waited very patiently.
That's okay. I think things should be said, and let's everybody have their viewpoint, and let's say, because that's what we're here for. I was doing some research a couple of weeks ago and looking at excuse me, I was looking at something that Stonewall had basically suggesting that they feel that trans and non-binary people are potentially up to 1% of the population. So I took a quick look at that, and essentially that 1% means that there could be approximately 650,000 trans and non-binary people in the UK. So that's roughly equivalent to a county the size of Worcestershire. And if everybody in Worcestershire tomorrow decided that they're not going to buy food, they're not going to go to the doctor, they're not going to go to work, they're not going to go and spend money, there would be public service announcements, there would be projects to try and get them to do X, Y or Z, and they would be working actively towards making sure that whatever they wanted people to do would be suggestible or approachable. And so while we're looking at it with individuals, a number of my friends who do triathlon have said they're not going to compete because they don't want to have to compete as male. And if there are potentially 650,000 of us, that's a lot of money that could be spent. That's a lot of people whose health could be improved. It's a lot of people that could be getting active and could be taking part in enjoyable sports, which would also mean that those sports would or potentially could increase from benefit from increased funding. And so essentially to me they're looking at this from the wrong angle, and by saying, oh, it's easy just to ban trans and particular trans women from sport, which is unfair. Personally, with the science, I think we need to look at the science and see how people can be included, not excluded. Yeah. I'm hearing a lot of talk about banning, I'm not hearing any solutions. And we need the solutions to allow people to keep playing grassroots sports, keep playing and being active, feel comfortable going to a gym or to any kind of activity session without fear of discrimination, and being allowed the same opportunities as anybody else, really.
Absolutely. And there's also this piece around, preventative healthcare, right? So the cost of that number of the population not being active potentially is much greater in terms of cost of life, isn't it?
Because most trans people will report that once they start a social or a medical transition, which is entirely their choice, most people feel a lot happier and more productive.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you touched on a really important point there, and a lot of the narrative that we're hearing around trans inclusion in sport is around this discussion about fairness versus inclusion. How would you respond to that?
I think we need to find a way that people are saying, oh, you can't have one without the other. I think you can, but we need to work together to find the fairness and find the inclusion, because everybody deserves to be able to take part.
Yeah.
So there are solutions out there, it's just what are they? How can we make it so that they work so that trans women can compete without the argument that there's this problem or there's this solution that we need to find or there's this thing that's in the way? Is it fear? Do we need to educate people better? As Naomi said earlier, the number of elite people who are trans in sports, I think since the IOC's initial change to the guidelines in 2013, there's been 2 transgender people that have taken part in the Olympics, but there's been over 700,000 people who've actually become an Olympian.
Absolutely, yeah.
So the number is, it's negligible, and they've got there on their own merits.
Of course, yeah. I agree with you completely. I definitely think it's a false dichotomy between those two. Did either of you want to come in?
Yeah, I can. I think it's really important to look at elite sport kind of by itself, as we were saying. The percentage of people that are elite athletes is not a true reflection of the population. If you look at, particularly in football, a team sport, if you take your average Sunday league football team, you take the best player in the team and the worst player in the team, the kind of gap between that is going to be really vast. It's and also in team sports, obviously different skill sets, different aptitudes are equally valid. So I'm not particularly quick, but I can pass the ball well, and I'm going to get beaten in a race by someone. I think we need to just look a bit more pragmatically at these things. And amateur sport is that, like, no one's transitioning in amateur sport to win. Yes, I won the Sunday league football. It's just not happening. People participate in amateur sport and grassroots sport for fun, for camaraderie, for that team spirit, for the social aspect, as well as playing the game that they love.
Yeah.
So I think that delineation is really, really important.
Yeah, thank you. And so what's the gender intelligence line around this fairness, safety, inclusion, random discussion that's appeared?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is that everybody uses the word fairness, but nobody's actually defining what we mean by that. There are many different interpretations of fairness. I absolutely agree with you. It's entirely a false dichotomy that's being put forward between fairness and inclusion. There are ways to achieve both. I think it is, I absolutely also agree with Dix and Naomi that we need to treat grassroots, where the vast majority of people are taking part, and elite sport differently. And I think when we come to elite sport, it goes back to what I was saying earlier about we're not actually asking the right questions, we're not looking at the right information, we're not actually exposing a lot of the cis-normativities that are embedded in these places alongside heteronormativities and sometimes misogyny, as well. And I think a big first step is exposing that, getting organisations and national governing bodies particularly to see where those things are, because until we make them visible, then they can't be addressed. But when it is visible, we can start to have the productive conversations, we can start to open things up, we can start to say, okay, so what research do we need to understand what is important at this level? What actually does affect competitive advantage in this particular sport or in this particular discipline? How might we then look for that? And I think also there is a big area that we're not looking at the moment, it's invisible at the moment, is the large numbers of trans people that will be playing sport invisibly, with no problem whatsoever, because nobody knows that they're there. And I think that one of the big issues is the more that national governing bodies step forward with these more exclusionary policies, or people fear that their national governing body is going to do that, nobody's going to come out and say that they're there. And I'm increasingly thinking that organisations like Gender Intelligence, who are trusted within the community, one of our functions could be, well, tell us that you're there. We're not going to tell anybody else, but actually it will enable us to do the research and go, actually, you've got this many thousand people playing. That's not causing a difficulty. So I think that initial evidence is a key thing as well. So I think those are the things that we're looking at. It's like, how do we actually get people to think differently about this, and to recognise that this is, particularly in elite sport, is an area where we do need to think about sports science and medical science. We do need to think about social science, and we need to think about human rights and ethics. We cannot, if we only focus on one, we get very exclusionary positions. We don't get the best solution if we're not thinking in those terms.
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much. And inherently sport isn't really that fair, is it? You can buy time on a bike. Get a decent bike, you definitely go faster. So sport isn't inherently fair. It is about winning and losing. Claudia, do you see anything differently from your perspective?
I always I ask myself, what this question of fairness, what does it actually mean? What is this fairness? Because if I play basketball, I'm very short, and the other women, I mean cis women, they are all two hands taller than me. Is that fair or is it not fair? They are not. It's totally fine for them to be taller than me, but I would never say that's unfair, because that's my problem. That's why I don't play basketball. So it's just, but really, so why would it then be unfair if a trans woman would play in my women's team and he would be faster than me, or maybe can pass the ball with more power? I don't know. If she's a woman, then she can be stronger or faster, and that's fine. That's why it's a team sport. So the whole discussion is a bit, I ask myself, what is the point of it? Because we are always regulating. Also, if we looking at that, it's always women's bodies that are being regulated. It's never men's bodies. No one would ever say, Michael Phelps, your arms are too long, or your feet are too big. No one would ever say that. But for women, you're running too fast, you're looking too slim. I don't know. It's just the whole discussion is a bit weird. I know some call that ideologically. I don't know. They say with doing some ideology, but I just don't get it. So it's really difficult for me to grasp it, and also to find proper arguments against it, because I don't understand the whole question, to be honest. And
Naomi nearly jumped off the stage to give you a hug at that point. Come on.
Honestly, I was literally just about to give that example, and Michael Phelps is viewed as an absolute legend, and he has distinct advantages. Apparently his ankles are able to, like, and his VO2 lung capacity is much higher.
And people call him gifted. Well done.
It's rooted in misogyny. There's like particularly around trans women going into women's sports. There's so much misogyny in that, because it kind of positions women, and they're so weak and timid, and they're just going to get overpowered, and these people ultimately view trans women not as women, and that's the whole narrative that's being pushed out there.
I think what's really important in this discussion is nobody's talking about trans men in sport, are they? Does anybody want to talk to that at the moment? What about trans men in sport? What are we seeing?
Honestly, nothing. I'll pass it over.
Nobody's suggesting that we should have a head start. I think that kind of says it all, really. So if you're looking at one group of people and saying, well, that's maybe unfair because you're advantaged. Well, the flip side of the coin is, well, maybe that's unfair if you're disadvantaged. So you should give it a head start. But it does fall apart. We are the inconvenient truth, I think, in a lot of these settings. And I think certainly when we're talking advantage and disadvantage, our view at Gendered Intelligence is that certainly at grassroots sport, just as was being said by my colleagues here on the sofa, that the range of huge advantages and disadvantages, the range of different capabilities and performances and things like that in your average team, or even in individual sports at particular leagues or divisions or levels. It's enormous, and whether you're trans or not is just lost in the noise, frankly, there. But even when you look at elite level, there are certain things which arguably, why do we consider some things fair and other things not fair? And I remember seeing a statistic, I think it was for the Rio Olympics, that something like 36% of the Olympians were actually privately educated, despite only 7% of the population being privately educated. Clearly there's an advantage going on there, but nobody's talking about that. And of course they do exist at elite level as well. But so it's not that there's no discussion to be had, but those discussions need to be focused and nuanced and based around the right questions.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to commit this?
I think, as Claudia was saying, that there's a lot of misogyny around sport. I don't see cisgendered men having their testosterone levels. They're checked obviously for at elite level, but nobody makes those results public. So to me, it's like, is there a correlation between people winning events, say the Tour de France or 100 metres, whatever? Is their testosterone level higher, or at elite level? Is it just down to that person has some element of genius in their makeup that makes them elite? Is it down to some gift they have, or is it down to sheer hard work, sheer volume of training? Does somebody win 100 metres but their testosterone level is actually lower than the person who finished in 5th or 6th? We don't know, because nobody's ever looked at that. So they're saying testosterone is this hidden advantage. With trans men, the argument has always been, because our levels are kept lower than cisgendered men, then we're not at an advantage. And if we were to win an event, then we've won it almost through a disadvantage, but we've won it.
Yeah.
And the same argument is then turned on its head for trans women, as this is something that's giving an advantage, when do we actually know if it is? Is it something in cisgendered men that we can truly say it is testosterone and the level you have, or is it something to do with your blood volume capacity or other elements that, as science and sports moves on, we'd find out more about? But because that's not looked at, we don't actually have a definitive answer there. And that to me is potentially where we should be looking at, to see, is testosterone that definitive advantage that everybody says it is?
There's so much more, isn't there? The social impact, it's investment, let's not forget about that. And the difference that all this money that I think has been wasted in trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist, if they invested that into sport itself.
Could it come down to the upbringing you've had, as you said, with privately educated individuals? Does it come down to the food you eat as you're growing up, your bone density level as you're growing up, things like that? Any specific illnesses or things that you have as a child that could enhance or prevent? We don't know.
No. So we've established that it's pretty grim out there, but I think what shouldn't be forgotten is there's some fantastic stuff going out there, that is actually making a real difference. Can you share some of those examples with me? Claudia, let's come to you first.
The policy we've just introduced, so we don't know yet whether it's working well. We know that the regional associations of Berlin and others, they've tried it for a couple of years, and for them it's working fine. So, but on the national, in the whole of Germany, we need to work it out. So we need to see what's coming, how many people are coming out, and how many are making use of the new policy. But in other areas, for instance, we have introduced unisex toilets at the national team matches, which is not amateur level, but I think that's also a very important initiative to address that issue where can people, non-binary people, and also trans people, or everyone, I mean, at home, my bathroom can be used by everyone. There's no sign at the door. So we're doing that, but we are trying to improve that as well, because it's not just the sign at the door. We need to train stewards. We need to find the right place that it's not in a dark alleyway in the stadium or things like that. So we need to improve that. And we're working on that. Also access controls. I said that the security people that then might do a body search. That's very common in Germany, that you have when you come into a stadium that there's a body search. It's not, I know it's not very common in the UK, but then also you need to find people who can do it and who's searching whom, and how sensitive are they in touching people or whatever. So we need to work on that. And also what we think works very well for us, that is we have installed a point of contact, like a person who is you can be contacted by anyone in football who wants to educate themselves, or who has a question about LGBTIQ plus topics. So he's an external consultant, so to say, and we work very closely with him on the topic. So he's well connected in the community, and we do our campaign work with him, but also he's helping us with defining policies and defining our next steps, what we want to do, because he then organizes exchanges with the communities, and where we gather information, what is needed, and what we should do next in that area.
Connection with communities is so important. You're absolutely right. I will actually come on to that in a minute, but you've got the mic, so you've got no choice. What are you seeing that's working?
So I think it's there's leagues like the LUL, which is the London Unity League. I'm speaking very much to football here in my experience, but that's a fully inclusive league. Anyone can come play. It's any ability level. Many of the teams in there have 2 or 3 teams, so it doesn't matter whether you're a beginner or you've played football all of your life. And then there's even the GFSN on the national level, which is a fantastic league, because you kind of travel up and down the country, and the home team shows the away team a good night out on the Saturday after the game.
Sounds perfect.
So they're really good things that are happening. A lot of good people out there as well, promoting what they're doing, and trying to say, hey, look, there is this safe space. The only caveat I would make to that is it's not FA affiliated football. That's where the problems start coming in.
Yeah.
So there's people out there who have fought for and created this safe space, but it's still kind of pushed away from FA affiliation. There's a lot of women and non-binary teams as well cropping up. I speak from quite a London-centric perspective, so I can't say that that's the same all across the country. But I've seen in the last 2 years or so a huge growth in that area. And again, it doesn't reflect a lot of the narrative that you see in politics and see in the media. Like the women and non-binary teams that are playing in London are virtually all trans inclusive. I say virtually because I don't know all of them, but everyone's like happy to just be playing football.
So if anybody's in the audience or listening right now and thinking this sounds great, where do they find those clubs?
So a lot of the women and non-binary teams play in the Super 5 League, and if you want to join any of the LUL or GFSN teams, social media is a good place to start in terms of looking for the GFSN Instagram, for example, or the LUO Instagram. Obviously, I play and been on the committee with Charlton and Victor, so if you're in South East London or Kent, definitely hit them up.
10% commission, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But there's just a ton of teams, again, LUO all across London, and we've travelled around. We've been to Glasgow, we've been to Dublin, been to Edinburgh, Liverpool, all over the place, and it's just brilliant. So there is happiness and hope out there. It's just, as I say, when you get to FA affiliation, that's where the hurdles come in.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you recommend this?
I think that's a great place to start. The thing I've noticed is that a lot of LGBT sports groups, if they're openly trying to recruit more trans and non-binary people, you'll see it reflected in the language they use with their social media or their websites. They'll often have pronouns, or they'll have a progress flag, so people can see that it's not necessarily tokenism that they're saying an LGBT club. They're actually putting words into action. One running group actually stated that before their social runs, they always had a round of introduction of pronouns, so that people knew what people were comfortable with. And I think things like that are a really good way to start showing people that they are inclusive and they're not just talking the talk, they're actually getting out there and finding what they can do to make people feel included and welcome, so that people do have a good experience, are less likely to be put off, and are more likely to go back and enjoy it.
Yeah, not complicated really, is it?
No.
Simon, so you'll have more connection with other organisations as well, in terms of things that you're seeing, things that might give you hope. What is it?
Quite a lot. One thing I just wanted to say, as I acknowledge that Claudia needs to leave at 3, we're just about at 3, so I didn't know if there was perhaps I should step back for a moment and let Claudia chip in with any last things that Claudia might like.
No, thank you.
I need to leave, so I would like to thank you for the discussion. To be honest, I was really honored to speak to you, because I think your views are so important to me as someone who's constantly learning. So I think we wouldn't be here where we are now in Germany if it hadn't been for people who shared their experience, because only that way we can make the right decision, and the right decision for people who are affected, and not for people who think they have to make the decision to say it that way. So thank you very much for having me, and I'm sorry I have to leave to pick up my child, because also childcare in Germany is not always perfect. But thank you very much, and maybe there's an opportunity to meet each other again at another point in time, and then not just over the screen. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for joining us, Claudia.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for keeping me honest all the time as well.
That's my training background. You've got to keep an eye on the time. So you were asking a little bit about good examples, I think, as well. I think as we are a generalist organisation, not sports specific, we do have quite a sort of broad brush around some of those. I think one of the things that we observe is that sports have started up in more recent times have started up in much more inclusive ways. It's the ones with the really embedded gender divide history that are struggling at the moment. So we would look to organisations like Flat Track Roller Derby, which again simply includes people on the basis of, well, where do you feel that is best fit for you? So that they are good. Touch Rugby, I think, has quite an inclusive policy. I know that softball has made some strides around non-binary inclusion and sort of batting orders and things that include non-binary folk. And the other thing that we've noticed from some of our own qualitative research is that people who are taking part in quite a lot of disability sport are finding that is inclusive, and I think that's really interesting and noticeable that when we become intersectional around some of this thinking. We can see that people who may have had to think inclusively in other ways can think inclusively more readily in more widely. So I think we can learn a lot from that area as well. So those are some of the things that we see, and saying, well, it can be done. Those are the examples. Let's see what we can learn from them. But I think in terms of organisations and sports becoming more inclusive, some of the really key points have already been touched on. So we always centralise language in our training, because in most instances it is the first engagement, whether that's we're talking to an individual, whether that's that they're reading a website, whether that's a leaflet or a poster that we put up or something like that, we're engaging through language. So I think having simple language basics and understandings and basic guidelines in place, and things like sharing pronouns, those kinds of things is part of it, and not assuming gender. I think that's really key. I think also there was a note that Claudia made in relation to facilities and making sure that facilities are as inclusive as possible, and particularly including thinking about non-binary folk there, what's available, thinking about things like forms and databases. Do we have more options for gender? Do we have more options for title if we still use it? Do we take pronouns in those areas and things like that? Making sure that there's a decent code of conduct, that if we don't tolerate homophobia, if we don't tolerate racism, if we don't tolerate anything, those things, then actually we don't tolerate trans behaviour either. I think it's also about being honest about access to the teams. We've seen some really great examples, heard about some great examples today, but not everybody is quite in that place yet. And I think one of the key things is to, whatever you do, make it visible. If people can't see that from the outside, they're still going to be really nervous about phoning up, walking through the leisure centre door, walking through the club door. That's a really, really hard step when you don't know what your reception's going to be. And if there are currently limitations or difficulties, or you're a really small club with no funds and you've got quite old school facilities, be honest about it. Say, this is what we've got at the moment, but another thing that was being suggested here is make sure there's that point of contact. Somebody that you can phone up that's going to be knowledgeable enough and say, well, actually, do you want to come along and have a look at the facilities at a time when we're not playing a game? Let's have a walk around, see what you might find, what can we come up with? What creative solutions can we come up with? So I think some of those things, I think it's doing as much as you can. It is a journey from many places, but be visible about what you can offer, be honest about what you can offer, and offer some personal contact. That goes an awfully long way.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think it was Tom Daly, he said at the LGBT Awards that a lot of decisions were being made about the trans community without the trans community's involvement and engagement. I wholeheartedly agree with that. This is what we're going to leave on here, so one thing that you wish that organisations, governing bodies knew when they're thinking about making policies, what would it be?
Shall I go first, because I've still got the mic?
You've got the mic, it's yours.
Almost anything about the reality of trans lives.
Just something.
Well, I think that's it, is like there is so much around, we're being constrained by the same old stereotypes and tropes and narratives, and actually just learn something about the reality of trans life. That will go a long way. That is the key thing.
Go meet someone.
I feel like I'm just going to be an echo now, but I think that's it. It's literally like a lot of the people making these decisions have probably never met a trans person or just don't really know much about us, and they make these decisions for us and on behalf of us, and it severely impacts our ability to enjoy sport. So I think this is why things like this are great. This is why I do a lot of the work that I do, just to be like, hey, we're here, we're normal, we just want to play football. Yeah, I mean, there's no such thing. So, but we just want to be involved and play sport, and I think that's a big takeaway. We're just human beings, and that's such a big part of humans' enjoyment in life.
Thank you.
My train of thought was along the lines of a discussion I had with somebody the other week, which was, if we turn around to every Olympian who's won a medal and said, you can't have that, we're going to take it away from you, and you can't play sport anymore, and you can't get involved in sport anymore, you can't volunteer, you can't be active, even if you wanted to, you can't. How would you feel? And how would you feel if everything you had worked towards was suddenly taken away and removed from acknowledgement or existence? And ultimately, I think a lot of the decisions and expectations are coming through lack of knowledge, lack of education, and I just wish they could perhaps live a day as a trans person and see what a general day is like for a trans person, maybe even someone who's in the middle of transition and literally having to come to terms with everything, because they potentially would think a lot differently about the decisions they're making, but because they don't have the lived experience that we do, they're making assumptions based on knowledge they don't have for a situation that they're not personally in, and that makes it more difficult for people they've never met.
I mean, thank you so much. That's the perfect note to end on. Thank you to Claudia, who's had to leave us for amazing input. We're all going to pack up and we're on the way now. Thank you to the three of you as well for continually putting yourself out there at a time when it's really, really difficult to do that, and really, really appreciate that. And I know that for lots of other people, it means the absolute world, so keep doing what you're doing. Thank you. Thank you to Pride House Birmingham for the opportunity to have a panel like this. These discussions are so important. And thank you very much for your time. Cheers, guys.
Thank you.